Hello, Helsinki. Hello, women in tech. Tervetuloa. I am so excited to be here. I am half Finnish. My mother is 100% Finnish, and she's here today. I'm also so happy that two of my cousins who live here in Helsinki were able to be here today, too. So I want to welcome them and say thank you for coming. As I said, I'm half Finnish, but I have to be honest, most of the time I feel 100% Finnish. Depending on how you count it, I'm either second or third generation Finnish-American. However, my household growing up was filled with Merimäko and Iittala. My relatives and family friends were Mäkis, Hallbergs, Rintamäkis, Hautamäkis, Rintalas, Wirtanens, Kettanens, Aukis. You get the idea. My only female cousin is Elisa, spelled with the classic Finnish double I. And my kids sleep in Merimäko bedrooms, our water glasses are Iittala, and I love Oivatoika birds. And we also play a game called Molku. Is Molku played here? So I didn't know if that was actually a Finnish thing or if it was a Finnish-American thing. But overall, you get the idea. All of that is my way of saying I'm so proud to be here on the stage at Finlandia Hall. I've come to Helsinki many times in the past. I've heard Sibelius symphonies here, and I cannot believe that I'm standing on this stage. I'm sure my grandfather, Oliver Hallberg, is somewhere smiling. He was one of the last Finnish-speaking Lutheran pastors in America. I'm smiling because my hair no longer looks like that. But this all brings me to our topic today, happiness and well-being. I'm going to focus particularly on happiness. When I thought about this topic, I thought about my life plan. When I was starting out, I had a plan. I knew where I was going to college, Stanford. I knew what I was going to major in, actually double major in, biology and chemistry. I knew what I wanted to be, a pediatric neurosurgeon, teaching at a medical school and taking exceptional clinical cases on the side. And I knew that I would want to live in either Boston or Chicago. And I imagine most of you, because you're here, clearly very committed and ambitious to be at a technical conference late on a Friday afternoon, have your own very firm plans about what your life would be like. However, in my case, almost none of it actually happened. And it's not because I couldn't have made it happen, I could have. It's because life happened, and opportunity came knocking, and it caused me to change my plan and change it for the better. One of the most important skills in life, especially in terms of achieving real happiness, is knowing when and how to change your plans, and that you can. So I thought today I would share some anecdotes that have caused me to change my plan. How I ended up a computer scientist rather than a doctor, how I ended up at Google and then at Yahoo, and how at the end of my story to date, I ended up back at the beginning. But we'll get to all of that. The first of my plan-changing revelations came from science camp. Yes, I am that big of a nerd. Anyway, when I was 18, I went to the National Youth Science Camp. It was an amazing place filled with amazing people, and the most amazing of them all was a postdoctoral student named Zoon Win, who gave us all brain teasers and riddles that kept us riveted for hours. We were all in awe of Zoon. One afternoon, a group of us were going on and on about Zoon's brilliance when one of the counselors jumped in and said, "You know you have it all wrong. It's not what Zoon knows, it's how Zoon thinks." It wasn't the facts that Zoon knew, but rather how he thought about problems. In fact, the most remarkable thing about Zoon, aside from the fact that his name is Zoon, and when you put it in any sentence it sounds like a Chinese proverb, is that you could put him in an entirely new environment, and within a few minutes he'd be asking the right questions and making the right observations. And that phrase has always stuck with me. It's not what Zoon knows, it's how Zoon thinks. My freshman year at Stanford, I had in my plan, I was going to be a doctor. So I spent my freshman year memorizing. Chemical equations, phyla of the animal kingdom, basic chemical reactions, and I was good at memorizing. But I had this nagging voice in my head that kept saying, it's not what Zoon knows, it's how Zoon thinks. Spring of my freshman year, I took an introductory computer science course to fill a requirement. It was titled CS 105A, Computer Science for Non-Majors. And I loved it. I found it absolutely exhilarating. Every week was a new problem. Every week was a new way of thinking of a new problem. I loved the logic of it, the reasoning. Our professor on the first day of class had said that historical data would show that exactly 2 of the 400 students in the class would go on to even take one more computer science class ever. But I had a funny feeling I was going to be one of those 2. The next year, when I was registering for my biology classes, I was exploring the course catalog, and I stumbled upon a major called Symbolic Systems that blended together philosophy, psychology, linguistics, and computer science, all into an interdisciplinary major. The study of how people reason. Cognitive psychology, how do people learn? Philosophy, how do they reason? Linguistics, how do they express themselves? And computer science, can you make a computer do all of those things? How better to learn to think like Zune than to actually study how people learn, reason, and express themselves? And poof, my plan, my major, my passion all changed. Symbolic systems led me to artificial intelligence and then to a master's in computer science, which eventually led to Google. But through it all, the crucial thing was being open to change. It was scary to change my major to something that I'd never heard of, let alone try to explain to my father what I would do with a symbolic systems degree. And part of me did still want to be a pediatric neurosurgeon. But in terms of happiness, it's more important to follow your passion than to follow the plan. So, fast forward to how I picked Google. I graduated from Stanford in 1999 with a master's in computer science. It was the height of the internet bubble. When I graduated, I had 14 job offers. Yeah, it was that long ago. Now, I like having choices, but this was ridiculous. I couldn't make up my mind. So I gave myself a deadline. I needed to pick a job by May 1st. And on the evening of April 30th, I got together with my economist friend Andre, the best grapher, charter, and purveyor of data I know, and we carefully weighed all 14 options. I, of course, love logic and data, so I created a big matrix. 1 row for each job, columns for salary, location, career trajectory, quality of life, happiness, all rated on a scale of 1 to 10. Andre at some point said, we can't have discrete values for this. We actually need to have graphs and trajectories in different directions. And Andre and I started creating all these charts and graphs, all this analysis, and it was so incredibly focused and detailed and analytical and organized that by midnight, I lost it and collapsed into tears. Andre would have none of it. He just stopped and he said, you know, Marissa, I think you're putting so much pressure on yourself to make the right choice. And at this point, I understand this problem as well as you do. And I have to tell you, you're looking at it all wrong. You're looking at it as if there's a right choice and a bunch of wrong choices. He's like, what I see here is a lot of good choices. And then there's the one that you pick and commit to and make great. So I went to bed and slept on it. And when I woke up, I just wanted to work at Google. I wanted to work at Google because the smartest people were there. I wanted to work at Google because I felt utterly unprepared to do it. Which brings me to my next 2 observations. But before I move on to those, I want to make the point that misperceiving that there's a correct choice is a common mistake. Coming to understand that there's a few good choices, and then there's the one that you pick through informed intuition and make great, is an important part of being flexible and making optimal decisions, and generally being happy. How do you take your choice and make it great? Surround yourself with the smartest and best people you can. They'll challenge you to do your very best. When you surround yourself with smart people, they challenge you to think in entirely new ways and think harder about things. My quest to find and be surrounded by smart people weighed heavily in my matrix with Andre. At Google, the first employee after the founders was a guy named Craig Silverstein, here on the yellow background. To this day, Craig is one of the smartest people I've ever met and one of my closest friends. When he interviewed me, we became so deeply embroiled in a calculation of CPU and disk space required to take each search click as feedback into the relevance algorithm that I completely forgot he'd given me an additional task of ending the interview promptly at 4 p.m. so he could move his car and not get a ticket. Luckily, Craig didn't get a ticket, so he was willing to hire me anyway. I guess if the meter maid had been a little more diligent, my life might have turned out differently. The company's founders were also brilliant. Larry Page and Sergey Brin. When I met them, they had just made a big transition. They had transitioned from being PhD students who didn't shower, ate pizza for breakfast, rollerbladed in the hallway, and didn't have the manners to say they were sorry when they bumped into you in the hallway. And they had transitioned to businessmen who didn't shower, ate pizza for breakfast, rollerbladed in the hallway, and didn't say they were sorry when they bumped into you. But they were also businessmen that had a vision for how they wanted to change the world and how search could do it. I was very lucky to find Google and the smart people there. It's worth changing your plans to work with smarter people, and they'll help you change your plans in better and more meaningful ways. Next up, do something you aren't ready to do. This one is probably the scariest so far. My life has been shaped by major decisions to do things I wasn't ready for, decisions that caused me to change my plan. Decisions like moving as a naive 18-year-old from Wisconsin, 2,000 miles away, to go to college. As a disheartened chemistry and biology major, changing my major to symbolic systems when I could barely describe what it was. I moved to Zurich, Switzerland for the summer to do research, despite the fact that I didn't speak the language. In 1999, I chose to work at an unheard of 8-person startup with a ridiculous name. And in 2012, when I was 28 weeks pregnant with my first child, I took my first CEO job. You get the idea. But back to 1999. The search engine market was fractured across about 12 different players. InfoSeek, Lycos, AltaVista. While most of these search engines would disappear over the next few years, the basic gist was that in 1999, the world didn't need another search engine. Yet when I interviewed at Google, Larry and Sergey were determined that they could change the world through search and laid out a vision around how. At the end of the interview, Sergey handed me a business card that was printed on a dot matrix printer on the cardstock equivalent of typing paper, where if you looked very carefully at the edges, you could see the perforations where he had clearly torn the cards apart himself. And he told me to get back to him. I could already imagine being the brunt of all family reunion jokes when I was 40. Let's face it, the company name itself, Google, is like a punchline. In the matrix Andre and I developed to evaluate my options, I gave Google about a 2% chance of succeeding, which was about 100 times better than any of the other startups in our matrix, but I still realized we would most likely fail. The turning point for me was when I realized that if I went to Google and tried to build a company of that magnitude, regardless of whether we failed or succeeded, I would learn more than I had at any of the other companies I had offers from. Doing something you aren't ready to do isn't comfortable, but if you push through that discomfort, you learn a lot more about yourself. You learn that you can do something you didn't think you could, or you learn where your limitations are. Both are valuable. It's important to push through that uneasiness, though, because it's in that moment that you find your courage and you really grow and learn. And for me, learning is what happiness is really all about. I learned so much at Google during the 13 years that I was there, it's hard for me to summarize my learnings in that many months, let alone in a few minutes. I literally think about my time, my experience, my takeaways from there every single day. One of the biggest learnings for me was focus. At a time when the world didn't need another search engine and everyone thought good was good enough in search, Google chose to focus on search exclusively. I still recall our first user study in the basement of the computer science building at Stanford. It was on a Saturday afternoon with 20 users. The homepage looked like this. When the user study started, the first task was to have the users do some searching. We had, for the purposes of not interfering with the user study, paired up the users so they would hopefully talk aloud to each other without talking to us and asking us too many questions, in order to so we could actually see how people experienced Google for the first time. We told each pair to try the search engine, Google, and go to www.google.com and try and do some searches on something that they've been recently curious about. The users would turn in their pairs to their browser, type in www.google.com, the homepage would load up, and 15 seconds would go by, and 30 seconds would go by. And as the researcher on the study, you'd think to yourself, well, maybe it's hard to think about what to search just out of the blue. And then at the 45-second mark or the minute mark, you started to realize that you were going to have to lean in and ask, what are you waiting for? And all of the users that day, their answer was, I'm waiting for the rest of it. In the context of 2000, websites were flashing and revolving, asking you to punch the monkey as animations ran back and forth on the screen. Users simply just didn't understand that a website could be plain white with a search box. We realized in horror that day that hundreds, if not thousands of people were loading up Google for the first time and not understanding that this was it and wasting minutes or hours in aggregate, that there was nothing else coming, that they should just start searching now. But on a broader level, I like that story because it's emblematic of how important focus was for Google. Our homepage was so confusingly bare and unpolished that I had one user ask me if it was a real company or whether I was from the psychology department and was there doing research. However, our homepage is unique and, dare I say, finished design, with its white minimalism and bright colors, made it clear that we were focused on one thing, search, and doing that one thing really well. One of the reasons we were able to deliver much better search is that focus stayed at the heart of the company for a very long time, arguably until today. The other element of focus that was extremely important for Google was user-focused thinking. In business, it's easy to think about what would be most successful or profitable. Technology, it's easy to think about what's possible and what you could do with that technology. While we sometimes talked about those things at Google, we talked a lot more about what the user wanted, what the user needed, and what would create user happiness. The user drove all of our key decisions. It was the guiding compass on virtually every product decision we made. And we brainstormed crazy ideas just for the fun of it. When we were just a search engine, we were brainstorming how to scan the world's books and make them searchable. We were doing tests on the weekends of whether or not you could drive up and down streets, take pictures, stitch them together, and search them. Even years before we did Google Book Search or Google Street View and made them a reality, we were talking about these ideas and thinking them through in a pretty detailed way. We also brainstormed a fair amount about other far-fetched things like space tethers, carbon nanotube delivery models, and suspension bridges between our buildings. Our facilities team innovated, our IPO team innovated, and even though not every innovative experiment had the outcome desired, it did achieve the desired outcome on a much broader level. Google became a team of people very comfortable thinking at scale while pushing the limits of what was conventionally thought to be possible. Innovation is a muscle, and when you exercise it, it gets stronger. Before I move on from my time at Google, and since this is a women's conference, I do want to take a moment. And I do want to take a moment here as I talk about Google and discuss the gender issue. I often talk about the fact that I am a geek in technology, not a woman in technology. Gender isn't something that I feel entirely comfortable focusing on. Sometimes I feel like giving the gender issue too much attention actually hurts women more than it helps. Recently, I received inquiries from reporters about my experience at Google as a woman. After all, I was Google's first woman engineer. And each and every time I receive one, I immediately write back that Google is a great place to work for women and that I have nothing but praise for my time there. Based on my experience, they've created a great workplace for women, especially technical women, and they focus not only on building a large community of technical women, but on all the subtleties that make that community work in terms of creating a diverse and respectful workplace. In my experience, they've been extremely thoughtful, and it's been an absolutely great place to work. Interestingly, however, when I send that answer back, there's never any follow-up. It's just not the story that people are interested in telling right now. But I want to state for the record that if you're a geek, male or female, Google is a great place to work. Since Google is such a great place to work, you might ask, why did you leave? I was very happy at Google. I thought I would stay there forever. I was also 24 weeks pregnant with my first child, and as usual, I had a plan. I was going to ship Google Maps for the iPhone in late September. I was going to have my baby boy in the beginning of October, and I was going to take the full 6-month maternity leave that I was entitled to, and then get back to Google and pick up where I left off. Then I got a call from an executive recruiter. There was a company. They needed a CEO. Not interested. They're close to you geographically. You wouldn't even have to move. Not interested. They operate in many areas of your expertise. Not interested. They're looking for a leader to come in and rejuvenate the product lines. Not interested. It's Yahoo. And before I could even think, I heard myself, I'm interested and I want to meet the board. See, the thing is, I've always admired Yahoo. When Google was a tiny little company, we wanted nothing more than to power Yahoo's search. All we could dream about was one day being a meaningful fraction of Yahoo's size. Yahoo defined the internet for the whole world. In our early user studies, the ones I talked about earlier, the users couldn't even tell us where Yahoo ended and where the internet began. They were synonymous. Plus, I've always subscribed to the theory that when someone makes something, it reflects their personality and values. It's one of the many reasons why it's helpful to have more diverse teams inside of companies. It's true on a team level, and it's true on an individual level. When you look at art, you can tell if the artist was tortured or generally pretty optimistic. With fashion, you can tell instantly how the designer feels about women. With technology, you get a sense of what the people who built it are like. Yahoo's products were always fun, useful, and uplifting. I had many friends who had worked at Yahoo, and I just felt like there must be good people there, and they needed help. Plus, Yahoo had incredible scale and a terrific foundation to build on. So I did something I was completely not ready to do. I would get to see if all the work I had done on search, maps, email, mobile, social, news, ads, some of the many products I had worked on at Google would translate into a completely different context. And yet again, it meant I had to completely throw out my plan. Yahoo had 7 CEOs in 5 years. 24%, roughly 1 in 4 people at the company, had left in the 6 months before I joined. There was a lot of good to be had and to be done at Yahoo, but it couldn't wait. I would have to figure out how to manage my baby and Yahoo without downtime. When I got to Yahoo, there were terrific people there. I've always loved design, and Yahoo was and is the biggest design problem I've ever gotten to work on. We had to redesign the products, the revenue streams, the team, the hiring, the incentive systems, the governance, the operations of the company. We got to work hiring more than 5,000 people, revamping every service, taking the insight of focus I learned at Google and applying it, readying the company for mobile, taking 50-plus disparate apps that were there when I got there, and creating 7 key apps. And we won back-to-back Apple Design Awards for the best app of the year, growing our mobile audience to more than 600 million monthly active users. At the same time, we grew total users for the first time in years at Yahoo, pushing Yahoo past the coveted 1 billion user mark. And we grew new businesses, generating more than $2 billion annually of revenue for the company. I'm tremendously proud of what we accomplished at Yahoo. The team and the work was amazing. I also learned a huge amount about resilience and determination of the human spirit, including my own. Fortunately and unfortunately, Yahoo owned a large stake in Alibaba. That stake bought us time for the first part of my tenure, but time ran out when the desire to split the assets and free up the capital meant that Yahoo could no longer be an independent company. On the night before we made the announcement of the sale of our operating business, a group of us gathered to write the blog post. We filled a whiteboard full of Yahoo's many impacts: marriages of people who'd met on Yahoo Personals, people who'd found jobs through Yahoo's job board, people who had met, people who'd found long-lost loved ones, people who'd become financially savvy, people who had just discovered the internet, or entire countries that had discovered the internet through Yahoo. It was an overwhelming number of accomplishments, and as we looked at it and we tried to synthesize it, it was just completely overwhelming. And then someone said it. Simply put, Yahoo is a company that changed the world. There's lots of companies, there's lots of successful companies, there's lots of profitable companies, but there are very few companies that change the world and how most people in it work, live, and think. It's been an extreme privilege of mine to be part of 2 companies that have. And it's made me think a lot about what I love about companies. One time, it was before I had children, my mother talked to me about the fact that she felt really bad for people who had a favorite time of childhood. She said she would talk to other parents and they'd say, I love it when my child's 3. I love it when they're 3. 3 to 5 is the best. And she said, I feel bad for them because their children move through it and then it's over. And she's like, and that was just never me. She's like, I loved all the phases. She's like, every phase was as good, if not better, or the same as the one before it. She's like, it was just all great. And not being a mom at that time, I couldn't relate. Today I can. At that time, I really related more in terms of companies. I realized I love it when companies are small. I love it when they're big. I love it when they're growing. I love it when they're hundreds and thousands. I like managing tens of people, hundreds of people, tens of thousands of people. I love all phases of the company life cycle. And I especially love the type of positive impacts companies can make at scale on the world. I mentioned at the start of my talk that my story to date ends up back at the beginning. Today, I'm an entrepreneur. I have a startup called Lumi Labs. And yes, Lumi is a nod to the Finnish word for snow, or one of the many Finnish words for snow. Snow is one of my favorite things. In March of last year, I founded a company with a longtime colleague and friend of mine from both Google and Yahoo, Enrique Munoz-Torres, you can see here. And we're still in stealth, so I can't say very much about it, but we're hopefully launching soon. And Lumi Labs is a working title and will change as well, so sadly we'll lose our Finnish name connection when we go to rename the company later this year or early next. That said, I can say that at Lumi Labs, we're building mobile apps for everyday tasks. We're focused on taking AI and applying it to tedious everyday problems. A few months ago, it was the 50th anniversary of the Man on the Moon. And looking through all of the retrospectives on that, it talked about the fact that the quest was to put the man on the moon, but some of the most interesting things that happened were as people built the technology to accomplish that. In fact, the integrated circuit itself was developed as part of that man on the moon quest. We feel like today the same thing is happening in AI. All the focus is on self-driving cars, on global facial recognition, but the truth is there's new and interesting technologies that could be applied to everyday problems that might seem mundane every single day that may have impacts as big as the actual quest and the frontiers themselves. What gets us excited is the idea of changing the world for the better and using technology to hopefully give people back a little bit of time off of their devices. This is the team. We're a little bit bigger now than when this photo was taken. We are remarkably, unintentionally, and happily about half women. And we have a lot of fun. And we're hiring. So if you know anyone who's interested in working at a Silicon Valley startup, please see me afterwards. And poetically, Lumi Labs' office is also Google's first office, the one I started my career in. It's fun to have come full circle and hopefully to get to live and love all the phases with a new company, this time my own. We have these memorable tile stairs at 165 University. They're not particularly pretty, but they, for some reason, kind of always stick in my head. I remember bounding up them in the summer of 1999 when Google was down, or the time I figured out a bug that I had been struggling with while I was out at lunch. Some days I muse, if someone had caught me on my way up those stairs on my first day at Google 20 years ago and had told me, back to the future style, that 20 years later, the 20-person company upstairs, the one I was joining that morning, would be one of the 5 biggest companies on the planet and be better part of $1 trillion in market cap, that I would have been the CEO of Yahoo in 1999, the internet behemoth, and a $100 billion company for 5 years, and that I would be right back here starting a company of my own, would I have believed them? Not in a million years. It wasn't the plan. But what happened was so much better. So in closing, and in the spirit of ending up at the beginning, I'd like to offer a quick recap. Follow your passion, not your plan. Choose one of the good choices, then make it great. Surround yourself with the smartest people you can find. Do things you're not ready to do. Focus, focus, focus. Flex your innovation muscle. Remember, it doesn't matter what your gender is if you're excited about what you're doing. And design thinking can apply to anything and everything. And a final observation that's key to all of this is know when to change the plan. Thank you for your time. Kitos.
Thank you, Marissa Mayer.